Welcome to another Blender artist interview. Today we're interviewing Evgeny of Poly. He's a 3D artist specializing in low poly, creating tons and tons of really amazing low poly illustrations over on his Instagram, which is here. How'd you start doing Blender?
My 3D modeling journey actually began in 2014 when I discovered Cinema 4D. But I discovered Blender only in 2020 after half a year of modeling in Cinema 4D. My first works, which you can see on my Instagram page, were created using Cinema 4D. Then I decided to try Blender as I saw some polygon runway works, which were created using Blender cycles in Blender. I decided to try Blender. It is free and open source, and then I'm just used to it, and now I'm using it in my everyday work and for 3D modeling.
Do you use it professionally?
Yeah, in the beginning, started it as a hobby. Then it turned into freelance, and I started to create some 3D designs, 3D models for indie games and something like this.
That's cool. So do you still do that?
Yeah, it is my almost full-time job.
Excellent.
And from time to time, it become part-time job.
Why'd you decide doing low poly? Like, why'd you start doing low poly instead of any other kind of 3D work?
I knew about low poly aesthetic from 2014 when I discovered 3D modeling, but only in 2019 I started to learn more about it, and I saw some low poly isometric dioramas on social media, earlier polygon runway works and works from other artists, and I decided to create my first work. It was old Soviet building. You can see it on my Instagram page. It was created in 2019, and it was created just for fun. But then I created another work and couldn't just stop.
That's amazing, because I really like the style you've developed.
I constantly experiment with my style, but there is some consistency in what I do. I try to fit low poly aesthetic in my works.
Yeah, you have a different kind of take on low poly than I see in other artists' work. It looks different. Like when I see a low poly piece, I can tell that you made that one and it wasn't someone else.
I usually try to fit classic low poly style from 2013, 2015 with sharp edges.
Yeah.
But sometimes I just create something different. It just happens. Usually I don't search a lot of low poly references. My main references come from real life, or maybe movies from other media.
Yeah, a lot of yours are very real life, kind of. Here, I'm looking at your original art, your Soviet building. I like it. It's a good one. It's good for a first piece.
Thank you.
Did you work off a reference on that one?
I only just searched for the building image, just the shape of the building, but all objects and the whole yard and location is imagined by me.
Amazing. Do you have a favorite subjects that you tend to do a lot? Like, do you like working off buildings, or do you like doing nature more, or cars?
Environments, my area of expertise, I think.
Yeah, I really like your environments. I liked your the 100 in a row you did. Oh yeah, your Poly origins.
Yeah. I created one work every day for 100 days, and there was a rule that I can spend only 1 hour to create every work from start to the end.
Wow. And so these are you took only an hour to make these?
Yeah, every work is created in an hour.
Wow, that's really neat. Do you did you use references for all those works? Like, did you work off a reference on these ones?
In these 100 days, I usually didn't use references much. because I needed to create too much works, and the ideas just came from my mind and my notebooks. I wrote many ideas from the beginning, and it was always hard to find time to implement them. And in these 100 days, I tried to implement as many ideas as possible.
Wow, you really did. Do you like just throughout your life just keep a notebook of good ideas for your art?
Yeah, I actually have more ideas than I can possibly implement them.
Oh, wow.
There are too much ideas and not enough time to create so much artworks.
That's better than having no ideas at all, though.
Yeah,
Well, let me ask you about your lighting in scenes. When you're setting up a scene, do you always use the same lighting?
creating lighting setups is actually one of the most favorite thing, and I enjoy it really much. I can spend hours experimenting with lighting, but at the same time, many of my works have the similar setup, and I just do some variations to fit the needs of the particular artwork. But I always try to experiment to find the best look.
Yeah, because I really like the lighting. I'm looking at your Instagram here. I really like the way you have them all lit is always so captivating.
I usually use some air lights, three or more. There are endless possibilities here. I just use some basics from photography, like the fill-in light, then highlights, but I don't restrict myself, and I have freedom in lighting.
Good. Do you use like an image for lighting, like in the background, like an HDRI?
I tried HDRIs, but most of my works don't have it, and I prefer just using air lights like studio lighting.
Yeah, you get more control.
Yeah, for that reasons, sometimes my works can remind some Lego dioramas from real world.
Yeah, they do. Sometimes low poly has a bit of a Lego or a toy feel to it.
Yeah, I played Lego a lot when I was a child and teenager, and this is also my inspiration.
Do you prefer flat shading over smooth shading in your low poly work?
As you can see, I use flat shading a lot. Recently, I started to experiment with smooth shading. In Blender, you have after smooth, which allows to change the degree of smoothing. My recent artwork with Lighthouse, it is not completely flat shading. I have some smoothing and some sharp edges at the same time. But usually I just use flat shading to create true low poly aesthetic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I really like that because in some low poly styles, there is smooth and flat in the same one. I think that smooth works okay on large surfaces. Sometimes a large surface looks funny if it's all flat shaded. I like the amount of detail you put into, like, I'm looking at the car you made pretty recently.
Yeah, I really like this car. It came from the real car I saw here in Tbilisi, and the final result is quite different from the original car. It wasn't a cabrio, it wasn't red, but I wanted to make simple but at the same time realistic low poly car with all details.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that you drive in it, fantasy world.
The one with the tree on the cliff with the roots coming out?
It is not one of my best works, but I'm so glad that you decided to mention it.
The leaves in the air are like one of the best parts there.
Yeah, it's just small touch to make it, to add more feeling to an image,
It does, yeah.
more dynamic.
Do you save the models that you've made, like your little grass, save the grass and the rocks and the little pieces that you make as assets for future scenes?
Sometimes I just move some objects from earlier projects when they fit to the new one. But usually I create everything from scratch because I want to create something new. I don't want to repeat too much.
Good point. Yeah, don't want to just remix old stuff over and over again.
Yeah, yeah.
On your little dioramas, do you use orthographic camera or perspective camera on those?
I use mostly orthographic isometric camera. And I use a special add-on for Blender, IsoCam add-on. You can see it on GitHub. It allows to try different cameras. Game IsoCam, True IsoCam, they are a bit different, but I try to experiment with them to find the best angle. And sometimes I also use an ordinary camera from Blender. For example, I use it in the red Cabrio artwork, but focus length is long enough so it feels different from most cameras.
Agreed.
It feels like isometric, but it's not.
Yeah, if you use a really long lens, almost isometric. I agree. When you sit down to make a low poly model, do you always start from scratch? Do you like to just work out of your head or build right off a reference image, or do you start with something higher poly and then try to go low poly from that?
Most of my works start with a little sketch on paper. I have a notebook for sketches, and it is better to start with sketch because sometimes the written ideas can change over time, but sketches help me to have raw versions of artworks which then I can turn to 3D, and the final result sometimes can be significantly different from the original sketch, but it's more controlled result than when you have only written ideas. And then I create a new project. And when we talk about a freelance job, then I have a workflow. I start with basic shapes, then I add more details. Then when the modeling is ready, I start with materials, lighting. But when we talk about personal artworks, I can start with simple objects, then add materials, add lighting, and start to move between stages. I can add a new object, then add new material, then change the lighting. And many of my personal works have some strange workflow, but I usually follow workflow when we talk about freelance work.
Oh yeah, try to be more structured on the client work.
Yeah, because if I do the same approach, then I will just spend too much time.
Yeah, it'll take a long time. That's really interesting. That's cool. Do you end up using a bevel on the edge of your models often? I was doing a different interview with Menno van Roon the other day, and he says that in simple artwork, a lot of the time he ends up adding a bevel on the edge of his low poly to kind of help highlight it.
I understand what you're saying. I use it, but usually I use bevel just for creating objects, not for creating some highlights on edges. But you can see it in my recent red Cabrio. I made some beveling on edges just for highlights, and it helped to make the artwork, the car more realistic and feel like a real car, not just a toy.
So maybe it's better in artworks where you're going for a more realistic look.
Yeah, but beveling can be a cool tool, but I don't use it much because I try to fit original low poly aesthetic, which is quite minimalistic. And sometimes I create works and they can become too detailed, and it is not always good because too much detail can ruin the original atmosphere which I imagined. And sometimes less is more, and low poly I think is more about minimalistic things than a lot of details. And I understand low poly as the idea that you create objects using as little polygons as possible, and you use advanced lighting, materials to make these simple objects look cool.
Yes, that's exactly it. You want to take something complicated and make it simple, but still make it real, almost real, with real lighting and real shaders. Yeah, I like that.
This is actually a reason why I prefer early polygon runway works more than what he is doing right now. He create more realistic, stylized works, and they are far away from low poly aesthetic, which was in the beginning. And his earlier works have some atmosphere which inspired me. But now I find his works different from low poly. Sometimes people call every low poly model low poly style, but I think low poly aesthetic is something different from it. And many works which you can see on Instagram with hashtag low poly isn't low poly aesthetic.
I agree. Polygon Runway style, his style used to be kind of a lot like what yours is now. His style has slowly moved into more rounded shape. His are simple, but they're not low poly anymore. Like some of them are actually quite high poly and still very, it's like stylized reality stuff now.
Yeah, and it is something like mid poly and stylized work.
Yeah, a lot of work gets called low poly that isn't quite in this style. I think you're right. I like the ground you do, especially in this one with the car in the desert.
Recently, I started to try new ways for creating environments. For example, in the most recent Mars diorama, I tried to make high poly ground, high poly object, and using subdivision surface, and then try to use decimate to reduce polygons. This is the reason the result is different.
It's cool. I kind of like it. Did it end up working well? Were you pleased with how it went on that one?
I want to spend more time researching this approach. I think it is a cool way to create more realistic environments, as this process allows to create more smooth cover.
Do you do a lot of post-processing or compositing work on yours?
In Blender, when we talk about compositing, I use just glare for some works, but most of color grading I do in Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom.
Oh, cool.
As I use it a lot for photography, and I'm used to it. And it's easier to create colors I want, and color correction is the thing which can really change the final look of an artwork, and it's an essential part of my workflow. Either it's a freelance work or personal work. In the beginning, I created some works without any color grading, but now it's just impossible to create some work without improving colors, saturation, trying to achieve the best look.
I agree. I used to never worry about post-processing or colors, but now I always at least adjust the saturation a little bit or something like that. Do you do a lot of photography?
I do photography from my childhood. I always with a camera. I was a filmmaker, and for all my life I create something. Either it's a camera, either it's a laptop to create something. I always find new ways to create art. And in the future, I think we will have more tools, not just Blender, but more advanced tools. Or maybe Blender will be changed completely, and we will use AI, for example, to make something even cooler. Because sometimes it is not, it's impossible to realize ideas which you imagine. And in the future, I hope I will find more tools to get the best results.